I'll call this hearing to order this morning, and the title of our hearing today is the American Energy Initiative. Over the next weeks and months, we intend to examine our domestic energy resources of all stripes that will diversify our energy portfolio, strengthen our national security, create jobs, and perhaps most importantly, make energy more affordable for all Americans. Of course, when we talk about energy, we talk about energy to generate electricity. We talk about energy for our automobiles, transportation, and today we're going to be focused a lot on that as well. We're going to focus specifically on the Gulf of Mexico's relation to energy production, energy security, oil prices, and jobs. Over the past several years, 30% of our total domestic oil production has come from the Gulf. Recent world events and market conditions have caused a sudden surge in oil prices. It is in this context that we must thoroughly evaluate this nation's current energy policy by asking questions like, are we doing enough to capitalize on all of our domestic resources? How can an increased domestic production influence prices and affect imports? What role does oil and gas production in the Gulf play in our economic recovery? New offshore exploration has taken a severe hit since the Deepwater Horizon blowout and spill. Without a doubt, the Deepwater Horizon spill was a serious environmental disaster. The human and ecological tolls are still being absorbed. But out of the disaster created by Transocean and BP arrived an economic disaster in the form of a moratorium on deepwater exploration issued by the Obama administration. Even since it was lifted in October, the Department of Interior has only issued 2 permits to drill in the Deepwater Gulf. A federal district court judge called the administration's actions unreasonable and unjustified. And even, I noticed a few days ago, former President Clinton characterized it as ridiculous. Deepwater leases have become increasingly important to our domestic supply over the past 2 decades. Companies are not drilling there While production from shallower regions has steadily declined, ultra-deep production has grown at an annual rate of 15% since 2002. It is projected to continue this trajectory for the next several years. In fact, PFC Energy projects that by 2020, over 50% of the Gulf's production will come from ultra-deep waters. This projection, however, was made prior to the administration's moratorium. So we intend to get into all of these issues today. We do know that as a result of the policy of this administration, we're getting 400,000 barrels a day of oil less than we currently had projected. And as a result of that, we're importing more from places like Nigeria, Libya, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela. So we really look forward to your testimony today. Your testimony is very important. And as you know, at the end of your testimony, we'll be having questions for you. At this time, I would like to recognize the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise, for the purpose of introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate you holding this hearing. This is an issue that we've been very concerned about for a number of months. I really appreciate the panelists who have come here to talk about the issue and especially what's happening on the ground because, you know, as we look kind of the big picture, Americans are fed up with paying high gas prices at the pump. But what's going on behind the scenes, the actions that this president has taken to create this crisis is even more devastating along the Gulf Coast. If you look at what's happening in the Gulf Coast where over a third of America's domestic energy is produced, the president's policies are literally shutting this industry down. And I know we're going to be hearing testimony from people that represent a number of organizations, not the big guys that everybody talks about, but the small companies, those small businesses that are trying to hang on, that want to go back to work, exploring safely for energy here in America, especially at a time when our country is looking out at the Middle East at a time where they've never been more volatile. And yet the president's got a policy that's actually increasing our dependence on Middle Eastern oil. It's leading to higher gas prices. We've done a chart just to show how gas prices have skyrocketed since the president took the oath of office. $1.83 was the price of gas when President Obama was sworn in. Today it's over $3.50 and going higher. In fact, we had the Energy Secretary yesterday here before us. We asked him, what is the president's plan to lower gas prices? And he couldn't even tell us what that plan is. Now, I did see yesterday that you can find out what the president's picks are for the Final Four. You can go to ESPN and watch the president making his Final Four picks, yet the Secretary of Energy, a cabinet post, can't even tell you what the president's plan is to lower gas prices. This is a crisis that's inexcusable that this administration is sitting by and forcing these industries to literally go bankrupt. And I know we're going to hear stories about that, and I appreciate the panelists, but we're fed up with this president's policies that are literally driving companies, American companies, into bankruptcy. Over 12,000 jobs already lost. Gas prices skyrocketing, while the Middle East has never been more volatile. I appreciate the chairman for letting us address this issue, and I look forward to your testimony. I yield back.
Thank you. I recognize the gentleman from Illinois for his opening statement, Mr. Rush.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I have to say that was a pretty strange and unique introduction that we just heard. So, but I want to thank you, and also I want to thank the panelists for being here this morning with this committee. Mr. Chairman, today's hearing is titled the American Energy Initiative, but ironically, earlier this week, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle voted to handcuff one of the agencies that has helped move America forward by promoting energy conservation and making our vehicles, appliances, buildings, and power plants more energy efficient. Over the past 4 decades, the EPA has been at the forefront of promoting better gas mileage for cars and trucks and saving American families of millions of dollars at the pump, while also making us less dependent on foreign oil. However, instead of offering any real solution or plans that would even remotely resemble an energy initiative, the Upton-Inhofe bill that my Republican colleagues just passed through this committee will actually increase our reliance on fossil fuels, both imported and domestic, which is great for the oil companies, but not so great for American families. I'm actually not opposed to domestic oil production, including drilling in the Gulf, as long as I am convinced that the devastating oil spill that we witnessed last year with BP's Macondo well cannot and will not be repeated. I'm in favor of domestic oil production and drilling in the Gulf. While I understand that there are no guarantees in this business, I know that the risks that BP took can and should be mitigated. Therefore, I believe that the course of action that President Obama's administration took after the BP oil spill was prudent and was necessary. As after witnessing the explosion that claimed 11 lives and watching over 4 million barrels of oil gush into the Gulf for months without end, I believe it was reasonable and wise to halt drilling until we better understood what happened, why it happened, and how we can better prepare ourselves so that it will never ever happen again. And when the president lifted the moratorium last October, I also agree with the Secretary of Interior's assessment that drilling could resume, and I quote, provided that operators certify compliance with all existing rules and requirements and demonstrate the availability of adequate blowout containment resources. For me and for my constituents, the anguish and the grief of helplessly watching oil gush into the Gulf for months on end while BP, the federal government, and every other entity remain powerless to stop it has not faded from memory. Yet I also understand that just as thousands of jobs and livelihoods were impacted and continues to be impacted by the oil spill last year, there are also repercussions on jobs and our nation's energy supply by not allowing drilling to continue in the Gulf. So today my hope is to gain an even better understanding of where we are now, nearly a year later, from the initial explosion and spill, and to find out what improvements have been made in regards to safeguarding against the same type of event from ever happening again. I look forward to hearing from all of our witnesses on how their lives and their livelihoods have been impacted and their thoughts on how we can move forward. Mr. Chairman, as I conclude, I just want to say that I do empathize with the people of the Gulf. I empathize with their fine representative here in Congress, Mr. Scalise. And I look forward to seeing a day soon where the drills will be pumping and the fish and the seafood will be productive and on our plates and on our tables and in our foods all across this country. And I look forward to the time when the Gulf is thriving once again. Thank you very much, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Rush, thank you very much. And once again, I want to welcome the panel. We have a distinguished group with us this morning. We have Mr. Marty Massey, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Marine Well Containment Company. We have Mr. Jim Noe, who's the Executive Director of the Shallow Water Energy Security Coalition. We have Mr. Rip Daniels, who is CEO and manager of WJZD and also Vice President of the Mississippi Gulf Coast Tourism Commission. We have Mr. Jim Adams, who's President of the Offshore Marine Services Association. We have Dr. Mark Cooper, who's a Research Director for the Consumer Federation of America. We have Dr. Joseph Mason, who is a professor at the Business School at Louisiana State University. And then we have Mr. Lou Pugliarese, who is the president of the Energy Policy Research Foundation. So I will recognize you and give a 5-minute opening statement, and then after the entire panel has completed, we'll go into a question and answer period. So thank you again for being here. And Mr. Massey, you want to go ahead, Mr. Sorry, I've been instructed that we want to give Mr. Pugliarese the first opportunity to speak. So we'll recognize you for 5 minutes, and we'll go that way. Thank you. And be sure and turn the microphone on, sir.
Sorry. Okay. Chairman Whitfield, Ranking Member Rush, and members of the Subcommittee on Energy and Power, on behalf of myself and EPRINC, we welcome this opportunity to testify today. We think it's very important we move quickly to expand American employment, grow the economy, and deliver adequate supplies of gasoline at affordable prices. Now, the Energy Policy Research Foundation is a not-for-profit organization that studies energy economics with special emphasis on petroleum and the downstream product markets. We've been doing this since 1944. Our reports are made available free of charge to all interested organizations and individuals. We've recently done some work on Iraq's potential to expand world oil supplies, the Macondo oil spill, the role of ethanol in the American gasoline market, Keystone XL pipeline, and the value of Canadian oil sands to the United States. But today I want to focus on two considerations that I hope the committee will give careful thought to as we look at how we expand domestic oil and gas development. First is that prices of transportation fuels today, they don't reflect just what is happening in the physical market now, but more importantly, what buyers and sellers believe about future supplies. And expectations about the future can affect prices today, and this includes expectations on government policies. The next issue that I think the committee really needs to put a lot of effort into is that government policies related to oil and gas, including transportation fuels, that do not hold up well under uncertainty are likely to fail and impose very high costs on the American economy, its consumers, and our energy security. We're often told that every time we face a period of rising gasoline prices, that common sense measures such as expanding access to the Canadian oil sands, opening up drilling in the onshore Alaska, permitting drilling in Arctic waters, expanding oil and gas leasing in new provinces in the lower 48, and deepwater drilling in the Gulf of Mexico will bring supplies into the market too far into the future to help us with the current crisis. or that the supplies will be too small to make a difference. Putting aside that we say this every time we have a crisis, if we open up our resources for development, we can open up the opportunity to shift long-term expectations on domestic supply and receive the benefits of lower prices even before the prices come to market. We may even get some pleasant surprises, such as we recently experienced with the Shale Gas Revolution. The application of new technology and techniques in horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing learned in producing natural gas is now supporting rising onshore crude oil production in the Bakken Formation in North Dakota. Now, major and sustained shifts in the price of crude oil since the 1970s can be explained by changes in expectations about future output. For example, in the 1973 Arab oil embargo, we really didn't lose that much oil in the prompt period, but expectations about the growth of production from the Persian Gulf came way down, and prices moved up quickly in the current period. In 1979, during the Iranian Revolution, once again, the amount of oil lost during the Iranian Revolution and the Iran-Iraq War was relatively small, but expectations about future growth of production from Iraq and Iran drove up prices in the prompt period. And the reason we say this, and I'd like to submit for the record an article we published on this very topic in the Oil and Gas Journal, and with your permission, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection.
This leads us to the question of why is a highly aggressive program for domestic oil and gas development so important? What do we get out of that? And I think one of the things we can do is go back, look back just 5 years. What did we believe? We believed first that we were running short on natural gas. Right? Many people testified before this committee that the U.S. was going to be a massive importer of LNG and that we would have very little gas for the utility sector. But the shale gas revolution proved that to be completely wrong. We should be grateful for the independent oil and gas drillers who don't read the EIA forecasts and have little confidence that the government knows exactly how much oil and gas we have in our resource base. And in fact, the shale gas revolution itself, in 1 year, has probably saved American consumers $50 billion. We also had a common view was that Latin America was fully explored. But we now see that with the Deepwater discoveries in Brazil, that is no longer the case. We don't know how much oil we're going to have out of Latin America, but it's going to be huge. Another concern we have is we have this view that the long-run price of oil is going to be very high, say $200 a barrel. And I think we would argue that that's going to turn out to be incorrect, that if we do the right kinds of things, the long-run price of oil is likely to be considerably lower, and that a lot of the programs we're engaging into are going to turn out to be quite costly. We can transition to the fuels of the future at a much lower cost. I just want to leave you with this one final point here. If we can alter the long-term price of crude oil by merely $20 a barrel in our base case forecast, $100 versus 80 or 60 instead of 80, 80 instead of 100 or 60 instead of 80, the present value savings to the import bill alone is $1 trillion. The savings to the economy is more than twice that much. And so, in the end, this means that the jobs, return on capital, corporate and personal income taxes, government revenues from bonus bids and royalties would grow substantially. All of this can take place without taking on any government debt, would deliver sustainable economic growth, and we can put thousands of people to work tomorrow.
Thank you very much. Dr. Mason, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Whitfield, Ranking Member Rush, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on this very important topic today. Unfortunately, little has changed in the Gulf region since my initial study on the economic cost of the Gulf moratorium in July 2010. Economic activity is still morbid in the region, and the outlook for exploration and development remains subdued. Each day, more exploration and development activity in the Gulf is lost. Job losses previously estimated on the basis of a 6-month moratorium have increased from 8,000 regionally and 12,000 nationally to 13,000 regionally and 19,000 nationally. Lost wages of $500 million regionally and $700 million nationally are now $800 million regionally and $1.1 billion nationally. Lost tax revenues estimated to be $100 million on the state and local level and $200 million on the national level now amount to $155 million and $350 million respectively. The Fed's August 2010 Beige Book noted that factories, farms, and mines nationally were all seeing, quote, continued gains in demand and sales, unquote, while housing sales and the related construction industry slowed. But in the Atlanta district, quote, fewer manufacturers noted increase in new orders, and more said that orders were lower, unquote. In the Dallas district, the Fed reported directly, quote, the Deepwater drilling moratorium was expected to impact revenues, unquote. Still, economic deniers seem to be unable to accept the fact that restrictive economic policies targeted to our most productive economic sectors weaken economic growth. That growth won't be recovered either. The lost development and drilling progress in the Mora and Permatorium have already created a lag in production. The concept can be thought of simply in the context of shutting down a construction project or a production line. When you start it back up, you don't make up for lost progress, you just continue where you left off. Moreover, if you constrain the production line to work slower than before and don't replace the machinery when it wears out, production will decline further, perhaps to a much lower rate. That's already happening in the Gulf, and recent recovery projections illustrate that dynamic. But even those projections don't contain the effects of additional restrictive policies. President Obama's FY 2012 comprehensive budget proposal includes an estimated $37 billion of punitive tax policies for U.S. oil and gas firms. Repealing tax breaks for hiring domestic workers when unemployment is hovering at 10% just doesn't make sense. And double taxing foreign revenues of domestic oil and gas firms puts them at a severe disadvantage competing against state-run, heavily subsidized oil and gas companies in such countries as China, Russia, and Venezuela. Which brings us to the international perspective. None of the decline in Gulf production arising from restrictive U.S. policies means that worldwide production will be affected. As projects in the Gulf and elsewhere in the U.S. are abandoned, firms will rationally move to locations with more stable and predictable business climates, whether or not those are held together by authoritarian regimes or are environmentally favorable. All the production possibilities discussed previously are being foregone in the name of Deepwater Horizon. But while debate still rages about the causal factor of the disaster, one common thread is accepted by all: BP. Nonetheless, the first Deepwater permit issued to the Santiago well on March 11th went to a project 46.5% owned by BP. It seems to me, therefore, that BP is the one firm undeniably culpable, but BP was the first to be rewarded with continued drilling access. That doesn't make sense. Economically, it has to be realized that any regulatory policy that raises pecuniary and/or non-pecuniary production costs will slow economic output. Whether the industry is mortgage banks facing onerous terms of a state attorney's general Consumer Financial Protection Bureau settlement, or the oil and gas industry facing increased environmental compliance costs in a permatorium, in both cases that means less jobs, lower wages, and lower GDP growth than would otherwise occur. Those are immutable laws of economics. Last, I would be remiss if I did not point out that the Japanese, following a devastating earthquake, are experiencing problems in non-fossil fuel power plants. While fossil fuels have their faults, other alternatives are only cleaner in terms of carbon output. Each, however, still pollutes in its own way, and as new energy sectors develop, each is leaving new economic externalities, that is, unpriced byproducts of production and use, that promise to devastate the environment in amounts equal to or greater than carbon-based fossil fuels. There is no environmental economic free lunch. There is no clean energy, just energy. A sound policy focus would be to use all of it wisely. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Mason. Dr. Cooper, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Since the Arab oil embargo of 1973, it has been clear that the United States must reduce its consumption of oil. 7 presidents have talked about this urgent need, and even President Bush, an oil man from Texas, declared that we must end our oil addiction. In the past, we have failed to do so. Yet today, the United States has a better opportunity than ever to change the trajectory of the American oil consumption, lower consumer expenditures, reduce our dependence on Middle East oil, and enhance national security by dramatically increasing the fuel economy of the vehicle fleet. The need is urgent, as gasoline prices are pummeling household budgets, especially of the middle class. Public support for a 60-mile-per-gallon standard is at an all-time high. The economics of putting fuel savings technology into automobiles and light trucks have never been more favorable. And because of the foresight of Congress, over a dozen states and the Obama administration, policymakers have a better set of tools to respond to the challenge than ever. The most important thing that we can do for consumers in the short term is to make a long-term commitment to reduce American oil consumption. Efficiency is the least cost, most certain, cleanest energy resource we have for our American energy initiative. Quick fixes simply delay the day of reckoning and make it more painful when it comes. U.S. gasoline prices this year will hit an all-time high if the EIA is correct, as will household expenditures. For low and middle-income households, the cost of gasoline will be the single most important determinant of the cost of driving, exceeding ownership cost. Driven by high and volatile prices, we find that concern about gasoline is at an all-time high. 90% of the respondents to a recent survey said they were concerned about price. 89% said they were concerned about Mideast imports. This high level of concern translates into high support for fuel economy standards. We asked about 60 miles per gallon. 63% said they support that as a target for 2025. 70% of middle-class respondents did. Now, as a consumer group, we always start our economic analysis from the consumer pocketbook. And we find that the public support for a 60 mile per gallon standard is in fact justified by the economics. Our analysis shows that from the first month, the reduction in gasoline costs exceed any increase in the cost of the new technology in vehicles. It's cash flow positive in the first month of a 5-year auto loan. And at the end of the auto loan, the consumer has over approximately $2,000 more in their pocketbook. Our confidence that consumers will realize these benefits and that a 60 mile per gallon standard will be met and effective is reinforced by the increase in technologies and choices available in the marketplace. There are now or will soon be 4 different approaches to electric vehicles: hybrids, plug-ins, hybrid plug-ins, and extended range electric vehicles, offered across the full range of cars that consumers in America like: compacts, mid-sized family sedans, large cars, SUVs, and pickups, by over a half a dozen mass-market-oriented companies. Gasoline-powered vehicles already rival the mileage of some of the hybrids, and there's lots of room for improvement with greater technologies in engine combustion efficiency, transmission systems, vehicle body design, rolling resistance, and materials. But the trump card here is the fact that over the last 5 years, we have put in place in America the possibility for a pro-consumer, pro-competitive, technology-neutral fuel economy standards program. We've adopted an attribute-based system which ensures that Americans will have the choice of cars they want, and automakers will have the incentive to compete to sell those precise types of cars. 15 states have adopted the Clean Cars program. 1/3 of the people in this country live in those states, which stimulated development of electrics and pushed the feds to a higher level. And the Obama administration has, in fact, transformed the institutional structure of standard setting in America, coordinating between the federal and the state level, showing that a 62 mile per gallon standard is technically feasible and economically practicable, and proposing a 15-year target. The long-term view allows the auto industry and the public to adjust. It reduces the marketplace risk of higher standards. It reorients thinking and gives them time to retool. This is the moment to change the trajectory of American gasoline consumption, to put efficiency as the first step and the heart of the American Energy Initiative. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cooper. Mr. Adams, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. I'm Jim Adams, and I represent the Offshore Marine Service Association, OMSA. OMSA speaks for 250 companies, including 100 firms that own and operate marine vessels in the Gulf of Mexico. Our vessels connect America with its offshore resources, transporting every employee, every pipe, every wrench, every computer, barrel of fuel, every gallon of drinking water to the offshore rigs and platforms. After the Macondo tragedy in April of last year, Secretary Salazar infamously proclaimed that he would keep his boot on the neck of BP. We quickly learned that his intention was to keep his boot on the neck of every business owner and worker engaged in the offshore oil and gas industry. With the full support of the White House, he has ruthlessly shut down our industry. Drilling rigs sit idle, offshore supply vessels are moored at the dock, and layoffs mount. President Obama and Secretary Salazar say they support domestic oil and gas development in this country. However, for the past 11 months, the administration's moratorium has eliminated jobs and continues to export them to foreign countries. Some have suggested that this is a partisan issue, but Democrats and Republicans alike have called for an immediate end to the mistreatment of our industry. Former President Bill Clinton, Senator Mary Landrieu, Senator Mark Begich, Congressman Gene Green of this committee, and others have called for the administration to stand down. Before the Macondo incident, my members operated 1,200 vessels that serviced 33 deepwater rigs and 50 shallow water rigs, and almost 4,000 fixed platforms in operation in the Gulf of Mexico. Our vessels collectively provided $44.6 billion annually in wages and represent an investment in offshore companies of over $18 billion in vessels and equipment. Our vessels and shipyards that build and repair our vessels had direct employment of over 30,000 employees. Additionally, over 100,000 jobs are supported by the economic activities by our U.S. shipyards and offshore supply vessel operators. The federal government collected nearly $1.4 billion in taxes directly and indirectly in 2008 due to the operations of this segment of the oil and gas industry. Like any market, the number of employees and vessels engaged in the offshore service industry will expand and contract based upon customer demand. In this case, the Interior Department dictated that our customers' activity in deepwater exploration would shrink from 33 rigs to none for 10 months and counting. In the shallow water sector, the administration reduced normal exploration activities by well over 2/3 from previous years. As a result, we are seeing industry-wide vessel utilization rates below 50% of the fleet's capacity, and employment reductions are over 25%, and they will rise very quickly. Business owners who are struggling to make payroll to retain highly skilled employees for as long as possible will be forced into making more layoffs in the coming months. Without exploration permits as the demand driver in our market, we will see further contraction. This resulting shameful decline in the American offshore industry and the permanent loss of a world-class workforce will be a loss to this country's economy. The de facto moratorium is responsible for exporting some of our most strategically valuable and technologically capable U.S. flag vessels and the U.S. jobs that go with them to foreign markets. To date, approximately 60 of these highest class vessels with a value of over $1.5 billion that employed over 1,100 Americans have left the Gulf of Mexico for foreign markets. On these highly technical vessels, crew members enjoyed the highest compensation levels in our industry, with an average wage of over $75,000 per crew member. Our skilled workforce is critical to the safe reactivation of deepwater drilling in the Gulf, and yet we are in jeopardy of losing those assets and the careers that go with them. It is time for the blockade to end. President Obama's moratorium needs to end because it is killing jobs. It is raising the price of energy, and it is making our country more vulnerable to an unpredictable international political situation. Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for this opportunity. I'll be pleased to answer questions from you or any of the members of the subcommittee and we desperately ask for your help to get us back to work.
Thank you very much, Mr. Adams. And Mr. Daniels, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Yes, Chairman Whitfield and Ranking Member Rush and subcommittee members, appreciate it. I'm a capitalist. I've been in business on the Mississippi Gulf Coast since Jimmy Carter was president. That's taken some doing, too, trust me. But I must tell you, upon being so, it is more than obvious to me that it seems as though since April 20th, we've forgotten the number of jobs that the coast and Mississippi produced as a result of tourism. Close to 1 million. And just from a backyard businessman's point of view, trading a multi-billion-dollar tourism and seafood industry for a multi-million-dollar whale is not good business. It's not a matter of the fact that we shouldn't have deep water drilling. I think it's appropriate. What we're discussing here is how can it do so without jeopardizing the businesses, small businesses along the coastline. I think that's doable. First and foremost, there must be some ecological impact. The ecological impact studies should be based upon not only marine life, but the adverse effect it would have on small businesses along the coast if there is a spill. Seems as though we've had some kind of selective amnesia as to what transpired and what resulted, and why it was so important that President Barack Obama imposed the moratorium. Let me tell you what happened. The explosion happened April 20th. The 25th, there were robots to have a blowout. It didn't work. May 2nd, started the drilling relief valves. May 7th, there was an attempt to put on a hat, a 100-ton hat. Didn't work. And on, then they inserted the tube around May 14th. Top keel started on the 26th, didn't work. And June the 4th, there was an attempt to cap the valves. June 25th, there was Hurricane Alex. As I sat watching what's happening in Japan, it is also about energy, but it's about something else. It's about the mere fact that we don't do business in a vacuum, and sometimes Mother Nature doesn't cooperate. From the time April 20th started with the explosion, there were some 5 tropical storms and 3 hurricanes. We on the Gulf Coast were cheering the fact that there was no more drilling, exploratory drilling, especially no leaks, because there was no guarantee there was a way to stop it. It made good sense to have a moratorium at that time, and it made good sense now. The reality is this. I think that there should be deep water drilling, without a doubt. However, the first responsibility for us in business is not to do business at the peril of those citizens who are our customers. I'm a customer. I'm not an experiment. Right now, as we speak, over the last 3 months, there have been over 60 dolphins washed up. Half of them were calves, stillborns. Right now, they're being explored. NOAA called this an unusual mortality event. Moby Salangi, who is director of the Institute of Marine Mammal Studies there in Gulfport, said this, and I quote, "When we see something strange like this happen to large groups of dolphin, which are at the top of the food chain, it tells us the rest of the food chain is affected." Now, trust me on this. I'm going to eat my seafood. I eat it every day. I'm going to do it primarily because it is going to be my specimen that's going to determine whether or not there was an effect. I don't recommend it for pregnant women, and I don't recommend it for my children right now. Keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, there's a reason for why at the top of the list of the inalienable rights was life. Because without life, there would be no reason for liberty and the pursuit of happiness. And what we're talking about right here is whether or not on the Mississippi Gulf Coast there are still tall balls washing up. I went deep sea fishing, caught black-tip shark and about 75 Spanish mackerel. What was strange about that was that there were men with hazmat suits on Ship Island, the federal island. Now, that was a little bit odd. We still get tar balls washing up. And all of us on the coast are a little bit apprehensive as to whether or not there will be another storm and our beaches will be black. This is new science. But at the very least, the industry, be it my industry or the oil industry, has to make priorities as it applies to life. That has to come first in our quest to pursue happiness. Because without life, there's no reason for the other 2 inalienable rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Daniels. And Mr. Noe, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. As Executive Director of the Shallow Water Energy Security Coalition and Senior Vice President, General Counsel, and Chief Compliance Officer of Hercules Offshore, I very much appreciate the opportunity to address the devastating economic impact of the Obama administration's reckless oil and gas policies. Mr. Chairman, the economic impact of the Obama administration's offshore oil and gas policies are direct, severe, and long-lasting. Over 400,000 jobs across the Gulf Coast alone are tied to the offshore energy business. Each one of our shallow water rigs is a floating factory. These floating factories employ 500 highly skilled and well-paid Americans, from the workers on the rig floor to the welders, dock workers, supply boat captains, helicopter pilots, and equipment manufacturers, and scores of others that support our industry. These jobs are at risk, and for one simple reason. The Obama administration is shutting down these floating factories rig by rig. At a time when this nation's economy is struggling to recover from one of the deepest recessions in our lifetime, and unemployment rates remain high, this administration is irresponsibly putting policies in place that are destroying thousands of good-paying jobs. Mr. Chairman, this is no abstraction for me. The extreme policies of the administration have claimed one of our coalition members, and I fear others might follow. Just a few weeks ago, the country's second-largest shallow water drilling company, Seahawk Drilling, declared bankruptcy, eliminating 1,000 good-paying jobs. I personally know the pain that this caused because I was there. It was late in the day on Friday, February 11th, when I arrived at Seahawk's offices. As I was led into a conference room, pensive employees got up from their desks, went to their doors, and eyed me. I had the opportunity to look into the eyes and see the apprehension on their faces. Once inside the conference room, I executed the necessary documents for Hercules to buy Seahawk's 20 rigs. As I left, I put my hand on a Seahawk executive's shoulder and saw in his eyes that he was fighting back the emotions of the day. He paused, took a deep breath, and walked out of the conference room to inform the large gathering of Seahawk employees that the company was bankrupt. The bankruptcy of Seahawk was avoidable. Seahawk had nothing to do with the Macondo blowout, but it was destroyed by the misguided and heartless policies of this administration. Members of this committee have joined with others in a bipartisan effort to implore the administration to change course. Even former President Clinton recently said that the administration's offshore drilling policies were ridiculous. And yet, the administration persists in an ideologically driven mission to raise energy prices and to eliminate offshore oil and gas production and the many thousands of jobs that depend on it. Mr. Chairman, immediately after the Macondo blowout last April, shallow water drilling operations were halted for 30 days by the moratorium issued by Secretary Salazar. Yet, after the moratorium was supposedly lifted, Interior refused to promptly and regularly issue shallow water drilling permits. Only 37 shallow water permits have been approved in the 11 months since the disaster, when the normal historical rate has been 10 to 15 or even more per month. That constitutes an 85% reduction in the rate of monthly permit actions. The Obama administration's policies are now coming home to roost. The ongoing turmoil in North Africa and the Middle East and the decreasing domestic oil and gas production have combined to cause dramatic spikes in the price of oil and gasoline. At gas stations across America, our fellow Americans are feeling the impact of the administration's policies. Mr. Chairman, the facts are clear. Despite the repeated statements by the Obama administration to the contrary, rigs are leaving the Gulf of Mexico and production is declining. Since May 2010, at least 12 offshore rigs have departed the Gulf of Mexico, 7 Deepwater and 5 jackup rigs, with at least 4 additional rigs currently under active consideration for departure. Once the equipment leaves the Gulf, it will be years, if ever, before the rig and the other vital equipment and skilled crew become available again for use in the Gulf of Mexico. Production in the Gulf of Mexico has already declined. The federal government's own Energy Information Administration confirmed that the production in the Gulf declined by nearly 300,000 barrels per day since April 2010, and that domestic oil production will fall a full 13% in each of 2011 and 2012. This represents a loss of production of about 450 million barrels per day. That's $45 billion worth of oil that we will have to find somewhere else. Mr. Chairman, we simply must reverse course. As a nation, we need to reverse the decline quickly in order to reclaim control of our economic destiny and protect our national security. Thank you and for your committee for the recognition that the Gulf of Mexico and oil and gas supplies are critical to our national and economic security, and your willingness to use all options at your disposal to compel this administration to reverse its dangerous energy policies.
Thank you, Mr. Noe. Mr. Massey, you recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Whitfield, Ranking Member Rush, members of the committee, it is a privilege to join you today. Let me begin by introducing myself. For 3 decades, I've served in the oil and gas industry for ExxonMobil Corporation, during which time operating safely has been a top concern of mine, as it has been for my colleagues. I was born and raised in Louisiana. I graduated from LSU with a degree in petroleum engineering, and my first job for the company was as a drilling engineer in the Gulf of Mexico. I am currently seconded from ExxonMobil to the Marine Well Containment Company as its Chief Executive Officer. I am grateful for the opportunity to discuss the new marine well containment system that our members have developed to safeguard the Gulf of Mexico in the event of a Deepwater well control incident. I am glad to report that the interim system was completed last month, and it's now available for deployment if it is required. First, let me briefly summarize the evolution of this system. The global energy industry has successfully drilled more than 14,000 deepwater wells. But after the tragic chain of events from the Macondo blowout, it was clear that the industry could improve our preparedness to respond if an operator lost control and subsequent containment of a well. So on July 21st, 4 of the largest energy companies operating in the Gulf of Mexico, ExxonMobil, Chevron, ConocoPhillips, and Shell, announced that they would design and build a containment system for the Gulf. They would form an independent, not-for-profit organization that would own, operate, and maintain the system. BP recently joined us and helped to establish the interim containment system. And I'm pleased to say that Apache has now joined us as well. Just before coming to Washington yesterday, Anadarko became the next member of our company. These companies have done what they set out to do. The interim system is ready to go. The Gulf of Mexico is now safeguarded by being able to respond in the event an operator loses complete control and then subsequent containment of a well. One of the system's most critical components is its capping stack. That's a piece of equipment that can shut in the oil flow, or if necessary, we can divert the oil flow up to vessels that are on the water surface. This capping stack can handle up to 15,000 pounds per square inch, more than the pressure of the Macondo well. Today, the interim system that we have in place has processing and storage capacity of 60,000 barrels a day and can operate in 8,000 feet. That's 3,000 feet deeper than Macondo. We're not stopping there. These capacities will be further expanded next year. With these additional capacities, we will be able to handle up to 100,000 barrels a day and operate in 10,000 feet of water. In short, this system significantly improves upon previous Gulf of Mexico response capabilities. We now have ready access to the equipment and the resources that we need to cap or contain a well. A few weeks ago, we had the opportunity to demonstrate to Secretary Salazar and Director Bromwich the system's capabilities. The marine well containment system, the interim system, has been accepted for use in permit applications. As a result, our members have submitted new applications that will rely on this system if it's required. We are hopeful that this will now facilitate the approval of deepwater drilling permits. The energy resources of the Gulf are critically important. They account for 30% of the U.S. oil and gas production and support more than 170,000 American jobs. As industry and governments work together to develop these resources, it's critical that we do so responsibly. In creating this new system, the Marine Well Containment Company worked closely with the Department of Interior and with the Coast Guard, who, as you know, will control and lead the response to any offshore incidents. We have great confidence in this system. It is ready. The marine well containment system meets the requirements of the regulation on containment. Thus, it enables the men and women of the energy industry to get back to work to the Gulf of Mexico to produce our nation's offshore energy resources. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Massey, and I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes questioning. On this new containment system that has been developed by these 4 major companies, plus Apache, plus, is it Arco?
And at Arco now.
And Arco. You demonstrated this to Mr. Salazar and Mr. Bromwich, is that correct, and their staff?
Correct.
And when do you expect new permits would be issued, the application of which depends upon this containment system? Do you have any idea?
Yes, you know, as I mentioned, Secretary Salazar and Director Bromwich came. They actually visited the site where we have this capping stack, which is a critical piece of equipment, and we had an opportunity to discuss the system capabilities. After that meeting, we were given the word that, yes, our system is accepted, and you can now use our system in your permit applications. So that was good news. And now we have members of our company that have actually submitted permit applications that rely on our system. So they're actually in front of the BOEMRE ready for approval now. And I'm hopeful that, you know, we're just a matter of days, we're going to get approval of some of those permits.
Well, that's encouraging because I guess we've only had 2 permits issued, and they were both for producing wells already. So that's encouraging. Mr. Pugliariso, I wanted to ask you, in your testimony, you talked about anticipation and its impact on prices. Normally, we think about just supply and demand on pricing, and would you elaborate just a little bit about how anticipation affects these oil prices or gasoline prices? You want to hit your microphone.
The best case we have is actually in natural gas. We had a period of time with very high natural gas prices, and as the shale gas revolution began to move, even though there were periods of times when the prompt period, the natural gas and the prompt period wasn't growing that fast, the price began to decline rather rapidly because buyers and sellers are looking out and they're saying, this is real, this is going to happen over time. There's a good chance the government won't be able to stop this. You know, it's very interesting if you... And I think one of the messages we want to leave you with is that you don't want to foreclose really positive outcomes. And if we sort of fix ourselves on this view that we know how much oil and gas is out there, we know what's going to happen in the future, and so we don't need to do X or Y, that's usually a mistake. We need to open the system up as much as possible so we can get as much different approaches to developing these oil and gas resources.
Do any of you have any thoughts of whether or not gasoline would reach $5 a gallon by the summer? Okay, a big yes. Okay, we want to go. Yeah, Dr. Cooper, what do you say?
Well, I stay away from predicting gasoline prices in part because gasoline markets are afflicted by 2 sets of factors that have nothing to do with economics.
Okay, well, you can't answer my question, so thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
It's a risky business predicting $5 a gallon.
Yeah. Mr. Massey, you had indicated that in this business of drilling in the Gulf, there are about 170,000 employees, and is that correct?
Yes, we from third-party sources and so forth, they've tallied up the number of jobs, and when I say, I'm talking about direct jobs.
Yeah, not direct, but not indirect. Yeah. And how many jobs were lost during this period over the last 8 or 9 months? Does anyone have any idea total in the industry?
In the tourism industry or the oil industry?
Well, I'm going to get to the tourism in just a minute. I was trying to get the oil first, and then I'd like to get the tourism. Yes, Dr. Mason.
I'll address the question generally and briefly, but that is a very tricky question because of this problem that good business owners will try to keep their best employees around, but they've done that out of their own pocket. And when you try to count actual job losses, the number can be skewed in a way that can create misleading results.
Okay. We know that Seahawk went bankrupt, though, and they had 1,000 employees, correct?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. Yeah, I think it's frustrating that the administration is using the fact that many companies like Hercules has acted as a good corporate citizen and kept employees on the payroll despite the fact that we don't have jobs for them to do. And as you mentioned, the bankruptcy of Seahawk drilling, they have at their height about 1,000 jobs. Hercules, once we close the transaction, we'll try to hire everybody we can. We can't hire everybody. We've even agreed to pay for all the employees who are laid off their health care benefits, even if we never hire them. So there are real jobs that have been lost, but I think, as Dr. Mason suggested, many companies have been treading water and have been waiting and waiting for the administration to act on their rhetoric, and they tell us that there's no moratorium, but we don't get permits. So it's like running an airline business. If you get a permit to fly from New York to Los Angeles, and you don't know if you're going to get a permit to fly back, do you when you reach Los Angeles, do you lay the crew off? Do you mothball the airplane? And those are the decisions that we've been faced as an industry. And because we've been acting as good corporate citizens, we've decided to keep our workers on the payroll. But at some point, it has to stop.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Noe.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, in the vessel sector, what we saw was deferred pain. Our vessels were intensely engaged in the response and cleanup operations through the late fall of last year. That meant that crews stayed busy on day rate jobs. Those contracts ended, and there's no work to fill.
Okay.
And so that's why we would suggest that the best efforts have been made to retain crews, but the ability to manage cash flow will have an end very shortly.
Okay. Now, my time's expired, but Mr. Daniel, if you have a number on the tourism side, I'd be happy to hear it.
Yes, I do. All of the fishing fleet, all of the shrimping fleet in Gulfport, all of those men lost their jobs. Okay. All of the fleet in Chalmette, Louisiana, and along the Louisiana line, all those men lost their jobs. Okay. Thanks to BP coming in and hiring them, it helped out a lot. But every fisherman on the coast lost his job.
Okay, thank you. At this time, I recognize Mr. Rush for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I thank you so much. We've heard a lot today about the impact of the oil spill and the aftermath of the spill on the gas and oil industry. And I think it should be well noted that Mr. Daniels is here, and he can speak to the economic costs of the oil spill to other industries on the Gulf Coast, including the tourism industry. And I want to note that Mr. Daniels appeared before the ENC Subcommittee in July of last year, before the BP well was capped, and before the oil had stopped flowing into the Gulf. It goes without saying that the spill was devastating for tourism and the fishing industries along the Gulf Coast fishery, and the oyster beds were closed. The fishing industry continued to suffer even after fishing resumed, and as many feared, that Gulf seafood was tainted. My question is to Mr. Daniels. You kind of indicated that the seafood industry is recovering, but has it fully recovered from the oil spill?
Well,
what's the status of it? Maybe it hasn't recovered at all.
Well, according to the FDA, it has, and there are beds where you can fish and you can shrimp. I put more trust in the shrimp and the fish to avoid the oil than I do in the government to say whether it is contaminated. Because shrimp and not oysters, but shrimp and fish can avoid poison areas. But I can tell you this, I eat a lot of seafood. Most of us eat seafood daily, and therein lies the problem. In my testimony that I submitted, I quoted the director of the FDA and suggesting that both the Corexit, which is the dispersant, and the oils, as evaluating some of the seafood, was at lower levels, which I can appreciate. And so consequently we eat it, but yet we're still ending up with these dead dolphin. And then I discovered that the federal government's, the FDA, the oil spill response has still yet not determined the deaths of the 89 dolphin that washed up right after the spill. They've not released that information. They did say it was as a result of environment over the last year, but they've not said why. Under any other ordinary circumstances, Congressman, if in fact there were a dozen eggs that showed up in Illinois and Chicago, the FDA would evaluate where those eggs came from, and then consequently pull in that lot from that manufacturer. Well, in this case, we have the Gulf of Mexico. The FDA samples are very, very few. And how do you sample? How do you sample the Gulf of Mexico? How do you say that this dolphin calf was stillborn as a result of Corexit or whatever? How do you say where it came from? So the simple answer to that is that we're eating a lot of seafood there. It's very, very delicious. We'd like for you to come down and eat it. However, there's still that apprehension that should not be there. It wasn't there before April 20th. And my only suggestion to these men in the oil industry is that you have got to somehow or another say to the rest of us, your customers, that we won't put you in jeopardy. And that is basically my point on that.
Well, I appreciate that. And that leads me to a question for Mr. Massey. Mr. Massey, this containment, the marine containment system now, can you undeniably and categorically and definitively and absolutely say that this system would stop the flow of a subsea blowout like the one we saw last year? Is your system, this containment system, is this the answer that we all been looking for?
What I can say is that we have the system and we have the plan that has been developed to respond to a well if an operator loses control and then subsequent containment. So we have the plan, we have the equipment that's needed, and we have the resources and the people. So we've identified the plan and how we would go about capping and containing a well. So yes, I believe we do have the system, and we would be ready to respond if called upon.
And the government, the Secretary Salazar has certified that this is indeed the case, that this system is the appropriate one that we've been looking for, that it is the answer?
What I can tell you is Secretary Salazar and Director Bromwich did come visit us. They looked at the system capacities and what we're capable of doing. And we've gotten the word back that it is acceptable for us to use in permit applications. And we now have permits for deepwater wells that rely on our system, and we're hopeful that those are going to be approved any day now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
At this time, I recognize the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Sullivan, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is a down-the-line question to Mr. Pugliaresi, is that how you say your name? And Mr. No, Adams, Massey, and Mason. And I appreciate you being here today, too. With our nation approaching $4 to $5 a gallon gasoline, what do you think is the main impediment to U.S. oil development, both onshore and offshore? Do you think it's the economics or federal policies or regulations? If you could comment on that, please.
Strictly federal policy and regulations.
Strictly policy. One thing I didn't cover in my oral testimony was covered in my written was the history of the OCS development. If we'll recall, we were ready to open that up just before Deepwater Horizon. Now that's completely off the table again. The Outer Continental Shelf is extremely important. We need to use all our resources. Of course, use them wisely, but not rule any out just because of policy. Thank you.
I believe it's the administration's political desire to strangle domestic exploration offshore.
I would agree with Mr. Adams as well. We've proven as an industry, we started, as Americans, we invented the offshore drilling business in 1938. We've drilled nearly 50,000 wells safely in the Gulf of Mexico since Harry Truman was in the White House. We know how to operate safely, and I would tell you that we have the will as an industry to produce oil and natural gas in the Gulf of Mexico. We have the means in which to do it safely, but we don't have the will from the administration. And we've seen that throughout the summer. And the questions to Mr. Massey don't even pertain to the shallow water operations. We don't utilize the subsea technology, but even our industry has been shut down this summer and have proven to have little traction on getting permits. So what we need is a few things, Congressman. We need a transparent regulatory process. We need the administration to issue promptly and regularly and predictably new drilling permits. We, as a country, are the third largest oil producer in the world. Deepwater alone, if it were a separate country, would be the fourth largest oil producer in the world. We have the resources available. We have the technology available. We have the manpower available. We just need the administration to promptly execute its statutory obligations to expeditiously develop the natural resources of our country.
That's good. And I have a company in my district that is sitting out there idle right now. They have a rig, and they're in with a couple other companies. And they're paying up like $1 million a day and just sitting there. And they call the new organization, I forget what it's called, it used to be Mineral Management Services. I don't even know what the new acronym is. But they say that, they can't call them, and they're doing everything they tell them to do, but they can't even get phone calls returned. Have you hearing some of that? I'm sure you probably have. But also my main point is that what if they said that this rig operator said if they can't pay them anymore, they want to get out of the contract, that's fine. They already have a place to go off the coast of Africa. Let's say that gas prices go to $5 a gallon, which I think is possible due to this. And President Obama at that point thinks, wow, maybe we need to start doing something in the Gulf. Could we get those rigs back quickly and those gas prices go down quickly?
Congressman, that's a great question. Just yesterday, Transocean announced that it was entering into a 10-year contract for one of their deepwater drill ships in India. That rig will be tied up through 2020. As rigs leave the Gulf of Mexico, they typically go on long-term contracts, years, 2-3 years. So it'll be very difficult to get those rigs back very quickly. But there is, I want to emphasize a point, there is a direct relationship between the issuance of permits and gasoline prices. As I think some of the other panelists have suggested, the market is driven, it's a spot market for natural gas and crude oil, and much of that market is driven by anxiety and the belief of the marketplace that the policies of our government will secure a stable supply of oil and natural gas. And I think that the gasoline prices today are an indictment of this administration's policies on ensuring that we're going to have a safe and predictable, secure source of domestic oil and gas.
Anyone else? Yes, sir. Mr. Mason? Dr. Mason?
Thank you. I'd just like to revise your hypothetical a little bit. I think in a $5 a gallon scenario, it wouldn't open up drilling, but the administration would more likely view this as an opportunity to further subsidize electric vehicles and the batteries they contain. In my closing comments, I made a point. There are other externalities being developed in what we call these clean technologies. And batteries, we do not have a recycling program, a mandatory recycling program for these batteries, which contain huge amounts of heavy metals. In fact, some of the manufacturing plants in Michigan are based on one of the world's largest freshwater aquifers. Once those heavy metals leach into the aquifer, you're done. You can take it offline. You can never drink out of there again after you discover it through many cancers and stillborn babies and many other things. This is not carbon pollution. It's a very real other form of pollution that is not being priced in electric vehicles. I think it is irresponsible to leave new externalities out there just like carbon was left out there. In developing these new technologies, we should price them as completely as possible while we develop those.
Very good, very
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We do have a vote on the House floor, 2 votes, but Ms. Capps, I'm going to recognize you for 5 minutes for your question period.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, each of you, for your witnesses, your testimony today. I'm going to direct my questions to Dr. Cooper, in part because of your title, Speaking Up for Consumers as Research Director for the Consumer Federation of America. I want to ask you to talk a little bit about the consumer benefits of making our cars and trucks more efficient. The United States imports a little more than half of the petroleum it uses. For years, we've heard from our colleagues on the other side that we can drill our way to lower energy prices, and we've heard that again today. But more drilling is never going to be enough to reduce global oil prices or U.S. imports of foreign oil in any meaningful way. We use about 25% of the world's oil. We have only 2% of the world's oil reserves. So my question to you is, what would be the impact on world oil prices of increasing domestic oil production?
Thank you, Congresswoman. In 2007, the Energy Information Administration, under an appointee of George Bush, looked at the question of what expanding access to the OCS would do, and here's what they concluded. Access to the Pacific, Atlantic, and Eastern Gulf regions would not have a significant impact on domestic crude oil and natural gas production or prices before 2030. That's the Bush administration. At the height of the production increase created by access to the OCS, they projected an increase of domestic U.S. production of 200,000 barrels a day. Now, that may sound like a big number, but in the global oil market, that's less than 0.2% of daily production today. And what you have heard today is the theory that an increase of 0.2% 5 or 10 years from now is going to lower the price of gasoline today. Don't bet your farm on it. You would never make an investment on the basis of that kind of analysis. So there may be lots of other reasons to look for oil in the Gulf, but lowering the price of gasoline is not one of them.
Thank you. I want to pick up on another theme that I've heard you say, and that is the key to reducing oil prices is to focus on how much oil we use. Reducing our share of global oil consumption from 25% could have a real impact on both oil prices and on imports. Last year, the EPA and Department of Transportation issued new tailpipe rules for model year 2012 through 2016 on cars and trucks. The standards will reap tremendous benefits. Over the lifetime of these vehicles, this program will save 1.8 billion barrels of oil because they will be able to go farther people will go further on a gallon of gas. And now the EIA projects the U.S. consumption of oil will stop growing, allowing us to import less oil in the future than we did in 2007. Now, you represent a consumer organization, as I mentioned. Can you explain how strong fuel efficiency standards benefit consumers and also protect them from fluctuating oil prices?
Madam Congresswoman, Mr. Pugliarese gave you a hypothetical about what might happen with $20 a barrel and what happened with Iran and the Mideast. So let me give you another hypothetical. What happens if 15 years ago we had adopted a standard that would double our fuel economy, just as we propose today to go to 60 miles per gallon? We would be consuming half as much oil, gasoline today, as we are today. That would be more than 4 million barrels a day of consumption reduction. Now, that's a significant amount of oil to take off the world market. That's over 4%. That's the kind of reduction in consumption that gives you headroom. In fact, 4 million barrels a day is equal to the total spare capacity in the world oil industry today. So if you double spare capacity, that's the way you alleviate pressure on prices. That's why I say the most important step we can take in the short term is to make that long-term commitment. 15 years in economics is a long term, to actually reduce our consumption. We consume a quarter of the world's oil and gasoline, almost. If we cut our consumption in half of gasoline, that has a big impact. But that takes 15 years. It takes the long term. And so we have to stop looking at quick fixes every time the price of gasoline jumps up, because it's almost certain to fall down again. and start looking at that long-term commitment to lowering our consumption.
Let me see if I can get one more quick question in. On Tuesday, this committee passed H.R. 910, so-called Energy Tax Prevention Act, that would actually take away EPA's authorities to set stronger tailpipe standards for cars and trucks made after 2016. Just answer quickly then, do you support allowing EPA to continue to work with the Department of Transportation to consider stronger tailpipe standards for cars and trucks?
Well, we support the interaction of a number of agencies, and it turns out that the Clean Air Act is what allowed 15 states to be involved in this space. So in our federal system, when we have 15 states and 2 agencies in the federal government coordinating, and that's the big development, looking at the problem from different points of view, we're better off. So there is no doubt that the American consumer is better off today. We have a higher standard because of the involvement of those states in the Clean Cars program than we would have been otherwise, and we think that is good for consumers in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
I'm going to recognize Mr. Terry from Nebraska for 5 minutes, and then when he finishes, we're going to recess until 11, and we'll be back at 11 to resume questions. Mr.
Right.
Terry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just an observation prompted by Dr. Cooper's colloquy with the gentlelady from California. We've heard some testimony here that anxiety or expectations within the marketplace tend to drive commodity prices. A real-life example was what we went through in 2008, where gas prices shot up above $4 per gallon. People were outraged. A lot of thought about speculation driving up the cost, but then when the president released the moratorium or repealed the moratorium on the Florida coast in the Gulf, prices dramatically started reducing. That's a real-life example of once there's some certainty put back into the marketplace, that they're known that there's going to be new fuel or oil in the marketplace, that relieved that pressure and that anxiety and brought the prices down. That's a real-life example that's modern day. And so Dr. Pugliaresi, I'm sorry, Mr. Pugliaresi, close enough? I'm sorry.
Close enough.
Dr. P. Us Irish have a hard time with Italian names. I don't know why. But would you agree with that assessment that just minor tweaks where the energy world sees that there's going to be additions, alleviates anxiety, and so will drive down the prices? Secondly, I hear all the time that we have this 2%, that we control 2%, but yet with the Bakken field shale up in North Dakota, we're pumping out unbelievable amount of oil from there that even 12 months ago was unexpected. Is it an accurate statement to say that since we only controlled 2%, A, is 2% accurate, and the fact that since we only controlled 2%, it doesn't matter if we drill or not drill?
Yeah, let me give you an
You have 2 minutes and 38
Okay,
seconds.
let me give a counter example. I think the shale gas, we should really take the lesson off of the shale gas, because industry, Congress, the everyone believed we were running out of natural gas. We were going to have very high gas prices. We built on the Gulf Coast and the U.S. large, expensive LNG receiving facilities. Okay, they are operating at less than 10% capacity.
By the way, it was Gene Green and I that had the LNG bill.
Yeah, it was a good idea, but we are now the largest natural gas producer in the world. There is not a single geologist that came here in front of this committee years ago that said, we have a lot of natural gas. And they thought we had none. So the notion that Dr. Cooper said that somehow we control X amount of the resources, look, we don't know till we drill it. We don't know till American ingenuity and technology has an opportunity to try different approaches. And if we lock up all our resources, we're never going to find out. And another point that I think is very important, look, petroleum, for a lot of reasons, has high value in the marketplace. It's relatively low to produce. It's expensive, but it's less than its value. It produces a lot of extra value, and that value is return on capital, it's revenues to the government, bonus bids, jobs, and most of the alternative fuels, and even some of the efficiencies, they eat money. They eat lots of money. And so we have a dilemma here. We have to decide how are we going to move to the fuels of the future in a cost-effective way, in a way that generates a lot of economic growth. And if you foreclose this sector of the economy, which has so much value for sustaining economic growth, it's a huge mistake. And it's something we really need to sort of think through.
3 seconds left, so I'm just going to give Dr. Cooper, I have no doubt about the accuracy of your polling, but I'll give a real-life story in Lincoln, Nebraska, Lincoln Electric. This is about a little over 10 years ago. They sent out a questionnaire to their customers, said, should we add wind power? It's going to add costs, but we'd like to do it on a voluntary basis. Should we adopt this on a voluntary pay basis? 90%, I think it was like 89% of the customers sent back a survey checking, yes, absolutely, we want you to have wind power, and it'll be paid for on a voluntary basis. They bought the wind turbines, put them up, sent out the voluntary sign-up, and the take rate was about 7%. So if you poll me, I want a 60 per mile gallon car. Am I going to pay 5 times more for it? No. So I think it's all in how we ask the question in a market society. And
Thank you, Mr. Terry, and we'll recess until at 11 o'clock and look forward to coming back and resuming question and answers. Thank you. Hearing will come back to order, and apologize we were a few minutes later than we said, but Mr. Green is, at this time I recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Knoll, a couple of weeks ago, a colleague of mine, not on this committee, but Congressman Stani, who is from South Louisiana, and I introduced a resolution that would that would try and have a committee hearing and get floor time on streamlining some of the concerns I know a lot of us have about the Department of Interior. The resolution requires streamlining review and appropriate approval of applications for shallow and deepwater permits in the Outer Continental Shelf. 2, take immediate action to provide shallow water and deepwater industry with a completed sample application which meets all the new safety and environmental regulations as a template, and provide written guidance and clarification to applicants regarding new safety requirements. And 4, provide permit applicants with timely and detailed explanations on any areas of the permit which do not satisfy the new requirements. Some of us in Congress are caught because whenever we say, well, you're not issuing whether shallow water or deep water, they say, well, we don't have a lot of permits that are available. But I'm also hearing that people aren't submitting them simply because they need to have some certainty on what they're doing. Is that the concern that we're hearing, that a lot of our shallow water drillers particularly, and I know maybe a lot of members, most of our shallow water is natural gas. If we could get oil out of it, we would be happy about it, but because oil is much more lucrative now. But so many of our shallow water drillers are actually natural gas producers.
Well, Congressman, you're not alone in having failed to obtain the level of transparency from the Department of Interior that is necessary to understand the true backlog of permits. We have asked for months, and in fact, members of this committee have asked in writing, and other members on a bipartisan basis have asked the Department of Interior to tell us one simple number. How many permits are pending? We've heard a number of different numbers. Secretary Salazar says one number. We say another. In fact, just recently in the INSCO litigation matter filed in the federal court in New Orleans, an affidavit was filed by a senior ranking member of the BOEM who said there's 270 pending shallow water permits. So this numbers game is a source of frustration for us, Congressman, and I think we owe, the American people are owed at least a true number of the backlog of actual permits. But I'll tell you this, there is demand to drill natural gas and oil wells in the shallow waters of America right now. According to the BOEM's own website, there's 20 permits that are pending. Scores of others would, in fact, as you noted, Congressman, be filed if the industry had some level of certainty as to how long those permit applications will take to be reviewed. When will they be issued? What will my liability requirements be? What level of certainty will I have that the federal government will back up their rhetoric with action and issue the permit? So I think the true numbers are yet to be known. And Congressman, I applaud you and Congressman Bustani for asking the question, because I think we deserve answers.
Once a permit's approved, how many days does it take for you to get your workers actually to back to work?
That's a great question. And Congressman, unfortunately, through the de facto moratorium that we've experienced since April, my company has kept many of its rigs idle. We've kept workers on the rigs, chipping, painting, doing busy work, catching up with paperwork, catching up with training, on the hopes and prayers that permits would be forthcoming. So many of our rigs that are idle are ready to go in a matter of weeks. But operators take sometimes weeks, if not months, to plan their operations ahead of time, which goes back to the dramatic lack of certainty is causing operators to just throw up their hands in frustration. Operators have to engineer the well. They have to secure caterers and cooks. They have to secure a drilling rig. It's an orchestrated process that takes time.
Okay.
But
I only have about 55 seconds left. Let me get to another question. So I know so you can't just turn on and turn it off. You have to actually have a plan. We wish it was assembly line, but you just can't roll that rig out and get it producing within a day or a week or even a month. Sometimes that would be awfully quick. Let me ask you, in your testimony, you talked about in recent months, governments like United Kingdom, Norway, and Australia have carefully examined the continued use of the same type of drilling equipment we use in the Gulf of Mexico. And each country concluded that the industry can drill safely and they're better off securing their own energy and reap for themselves significant economic gains of a healthy oil and gas industry. We're talking about Norway, United Kingdom, and Australia. And can you elaborate on the process these countries went through? Because they stood down after what happened in the Gulf of Mexico with Horizon, but they're back out producing right now, aren't they, in drilling?
That's right, and they issued no moratorium in the UK as an example. The UK, a very advanced technological place, they specifically considered whether a moratorium was necessary, and they concluded, just as President Obama should have concluded, is should we drill in our own waters using our own labor and reaping the economic benefits from that activity where we know we could drill safely, or should we export those jobs and export our energy security to places that are unstable or potentially hostile to their interests?
This time I recognize the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really appreciated the opening statements that you all made, hitting on a number of different points. Mr. Noe, I want to start with some of the comments that you made. You started off talking about the bankruptcy of Seahawk, and here is a company, as you say, the second largest shallow water driller. You point out that 85% reduction that we've seen in shallow water drilling. Of course, this was a Deepwater disaster with the Macondo well. Presidents said many times there's no moratorium on shallow water drilling, yet, as you point out, there's an 85% reduction in shallow water drilling, not to mention what's going on in the OCS. And then you have this bankruptcy and kind of riveting the testimony you gave about actually having to be there and seeing some of those employees who literally are losing their livelihoods, losing their careers, not because they did anything wrong, but because this administration has chosen to go down a path of shutting down an entire industry. And so if you can tell me, because obviously this is not just limited to the companies along the Gulf Coast, the high gas prices that people are paying obviously is one national impact, but also the companies that these companies in your coalition do business with. They buy pumps for these rigs that are made by Caterpillar in Illinois. If you can give me a little bit of the ripple effects that this has throughout the country, not just in South Louisiana with this radical policy.
Congressman, that's a great question. I think we need to understand very clearly that this economic tragedy is not limited to the borders of Louisiana and Texas, as you noted, Congressman. To give you one example, Hercules Offshore, on each of our drilling rigs, we have 3 engines. Almost all of them are manufactured by Caterpillar, made in Illinois. We conducted a survey of just our members in the last couple of years, and the spend that we contribute outside of Louisiana and Texas is frankly staggering. $376 million came from the state of Illinois, far from the Gulf of Mexico. And that extends to states like Oklahoma, $125 million over a 3-year period of just this survey that we conducted. Colorado, $35 million. I mean, we buy each of our several thousand workers 2 pairs of Red Wing boots every year, made in Red Wing, Minnesota. The tentacles of the economic connection of the industry reach far beyond the Gulf South and will reach the home states of your constituents today.
And let me ask Mr. Adams to touch on that too, because I know you represent a large group of companies that work in the industry as well. What kind of ripples are you seeing?
Well, we're seeing a ripple effect across South Louisiana directly. Imagine being a shipyard owner or a shipyard worker. 2011, the market anticipated that Deepwater wells would move up to somewhere in the mid-40s from 33. There were plans for that. There were vessel orders made, and those contracts had to be pulled back. There was no work for the vessels that would be built. And then the ripple effect for building a vessel goes across the country, just as Mr. Noe said. We also are, our whole industry is about delivering goods and people out to the rigs, and that goes from groceries to all kinds of hardware supplies, and that's just shut down right now.
Yeah, and I know, Mr. Daniels, I share a lot of the concerns you have about tourism, seafood. In fact, I still love eating the great Gulf seafood that we have. We've been pushing the FDA to ramp up testing. I think right now Gulf seafood is probably the safest, most tested food in the world because of this. I think the biggest frustration a lot of us have is that the people being punished aren't the people who actually created this disaster. BP and their negligence, they cut the corners, and yet it's the companies that are represented at this table that had absolutely nothing to do with it, that have played by the rules, actually have a higher bar for safety. And yet you've got the president that's literally initiating a policy that's going after and shutting down an entire industry, and it's leading to higher gas prices. It's leading to thousands of job losses. And I think what's most irritating, we've been trying to get a meeting with the president to talk specifically about this issue. I've got a letter I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record. Our delegation, all Republicans, all Democrats, back in June asked to meet with the president to talk specifically about this issue. I think what is most frustrating, not only have we not gotten a meeting, we haven't even gotten a response from the White House. This is the entire delegation talking about a policy that's led to thousands of jobs, and yet the president has time to go and do his brackets for the NCAA tournament. We know the president's bracket picks. We don't know his energy policy. The energy secretary yesterday sat here and said he can't tell us the president's planning to lower gas prices, but he's got time to let people know what his picks are for energy. I'd like to also ask unanimous consent to issue into the record. This is a letter 100 members of Congress signed to the president weeks ago asking him to let these people get back to work drilling safely. We still haven't gotten a response on this letter. It's time for the president to act. This is costing jobs, it's raising gas prices, and it's killing America's energy security.
Without
Thank
objection.
you, and I yield back.
This time the gentleman from Mr. Inslee is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Just for the record, I'd like to say, since our commander-in-chief was questioned about basketball, I would bet $1 he could beat the last gentleman in a game on 101. I'd like to see it, but we'll
be happy to take him up on that. I'd like to meet with him to do that. If that's what I need to do to meet with him, I'll take him up on it.
I'll suggest.
Challenge him in a day. Thank you, Mr. Inslee.
Well, he's taken me to the hoop, so he's a good ball player. I want to ask Dr. Mason some questions. And, Doctor, the reason I'm asking this question is you have doctor in front of your name. That's why I'm asking you these questions. So if you went to the doctor and the doctor told you you had cancer, what would you do? Would you listen to him in general?
Depends on what kind of doctor.
Well, let's assume he was a good doctor. Let's assume he was a good doctor. Let's say he was a Nobel Prize-winning doctor. And let's say you had some questions about that diagnosis. So as a rational person, you went and got a second opinion. And that doctor told you you had cancer. Do you think you might pay attention to him?
Perhaps.
Okay, let's say that you had some questions about that doctor. So you went to 2,500 other doctors, and they all told you you had cancer. If that happened, would you then go to keep trying to find a doctor who said you didn't have cancer, or do you think you might do something about it?
2,500 qualified doctors within their specialty field, perhaps.
So so you'll know what this committee has found out is that there, at a minimum and a lot more, 2,500 qualified science doctors who have concluded that the Earth has a pathology, and that pathology is carbon dioxide pollution, which is radically changing its ecosystem to our detriment. Now, this committee voted essentially to ignore all of these doctors and sort of go try to find some other doctors somewhere in the earth that had some question about it, and have ignored all of the physicians of the earth who've told us we got a problem. Now, from what you know about the science, and I'll give you a chance to voice your opinion now, do you think the state of these physicians of the earth who've told us we got a problem, do you think we should listen to them and try to do something about this pathology we're experiencing, namely carbon pollution in the earth?
I see no problem doing something about it. I'm not an environmental scientist or really feel qualified to opine in any expert capacity about the carbon's contribution to pollution. My personal belief that it certainly plays a role, however.
So your belief is, based on what you know of the science, that carbon pollution probably does play a role in some changes in the climate. Is that a fair statement?
I don't object to that statement, no.
Well, unfortunately, the Republican majority did, who voted en bloc on a continuing front on their war on science to deny all of these scientists yesterday, just so you'll know. I want to refer to some production numbers about oil production in the United States. Could we put the graphs up? The first graph I would refer the panel to is a chart showing U.S. domestic oil production, which sort of bottomed out in 2008. I think that was the year that President Obama took office, and has gone up in 2009. Excuse me, there's a different bar chart I think we have in a different order. Yeah, now we're looking at the right chart. You'll see the bottomed out at about 6.7 million barrels per day when President Obama was elected. Since then has been going up. Is at about 7.3 in 2009. It is about 7.5 in 2010. These are production numbers from the United States Energy Agency. Next slide, please. This slide shows Gulf of Mexico crude oil production, million barrels per month. You'll notice was going at about 40 million barrels per month pretty steadily from October 2006 to the Hurricane Gustav and Ike when it plunged in October 2008, came back fairly rapidly in the first few months of the Obama administration, and now has been in a relatively steady state with some ups and downs, about 5 million barrels per month production during the Obama presidency. Next slide, please. The next slide shows annual U.S. natural gas gross withdrawals. We'll see that you get over toward the right side, you see 2000 pretty steady. 2008, it has been going up fairly dramatically in the last 2 years, 2008, 2009, right to the right of the graph. You'll see that is going up. Now, from these slides, which are numbers, these are not, talking points. These are not propaganda. These are not political hack jobs. These are numbers. Now, from the numbers, it looks to me like the United States is experiencing an increase in domestic oil production, an increase in Gulf of Mexico, or at least a stable production in the Gulf of Mexico, and a significant increase at a fairly rapid rate in natural gas production in the United States. And I just think it's important for us to look at the numbers. The numbers don't lie, and propaganda does. Thank you.
Congressman, could I add something to that? Could I answer that question?
Yes, sir.
I think it is a fundamental misunderstanding of the way the oil and gas industry works for the Obama administration to take credit for the increase in production. The increase in production that we've seen in the last couple of years are as the result of new oil coming online that was decades in the making, literally decades in the making and planning, just to name a few. And these are all major new finds that took years and sometimes decades to plan and bring online. In 2007, Independence Hub in Atlantis, 2008, Neptune, Blindface, Thunder Horse, 2009, Mirage, Tahiti. 2010 Telemark, Perdido. These took years of planning, and they were planned and executed under the apparatus of the prior administration. And the federal government's EIA has already stated itself that production has declined in 2010 and will continue to do so in 2011.
Well, you know, that's really interesting because you are really happy to point out he shouldn't get any credit for this, but he should be responsible for everything else that happens in the world, including increasing gas prices, which is a result of demand increases from China and India. Thanks a lot for being fair to our Commander-in-Chief.
Mr. Griffith, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, if I could yield to the gentleman from Louisiana.
The gentleman yields 5 minutes to the gentleman from Louisiana.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Inslee's idea, I'll be happy to take him up if challenging the president to a game of one-on-one basketball gets me a meeting with him so we can talk about this crisis that's led to thousands of job losses and higher gas prices. I'll be happy to challenge the president to basketball. And frankly, I think I could take him in a game of one-on-one. I've seen him throw a baseball, so I'll be happy to offer up that challenge, and hopefully the president accepts, and then during the game we can talk about the fact that you've got thousands of people who have lost their job and cannot get a response from this administration, and this problem is getting worse. When you talked about, I think, Mr. Adams, you talked about the revenue losses. I think the second largest generator of federal revenue, next to income taxes, is the revenue paid by the oil and gas industry. I know a lot of people like to beat up on the oil and gas industry and act like they're not paying any taxes. The second largest generator of federal revenue is the oil and gas industry, primarily because of the leases, the bonus bids, the royalties, not only to the federal government, to state and local government. And with this attempt, or this policy by the president to shut down this industry, just what would that mean in terms of revenue? And I think you had some recent revenues of how much money the federal government collected on all of these various forms of payments from the oil and gas industry. Can you, Mr. Adams, touch further on that?
I believe my testimony, I had $1.4 billion in taxes directly from our segment. Maybe Mr. Noe could help me with the full royalties. I would like to make 2 points real quickly. Taking credit for last year's production is like the farmer asking the banker to give him credit based on last year's yield when he's failed to put in a crop this year. It just doesn't work. And the other part of this whole economic and jobs argument that I think needs to be appreciated is exploration is labor intensive. It's capital intensive. Production is production. The best production doesn't require intense labor or intense capital. And so that's why the vessels that serve these deepwater rigs, which are the hive, and our vessels are the bees of activity, that's why we are in an economic depression right now.
And Mr. Noe, did you want to also follow up on that?
Just to echo on what Mr. Adams said, is the biggest benefactor, and really, if you think about it, the biggest oil company in the world and the biggest shareholder of any oil company in the world is the U.S. federal government. The U.S. federal government controls offshore leasing, and since 1982 has received over $200 billion from a variety of royalty payments, lease payments, et cetera. It's in the billions, of course, not just from leasing activity, but from bonuses paid for lease sales, which is important to note that this year, in 2011, will be the first year in 60 that we haven't had a lease sale. The Department of Interior has...
The first time since when? I'm sorry to interrupt you.
In the last 60 years.
We've had an
offshore lease sale for a generation.
And so I guess using the logic of the president, if he's going to try to take claim for production today that was authorized, explored years ago, I guess in a few years that means that a future president is going to have a big reduction in production. And I guess the president will blame that next president because of the policies that are being made today that are strangling this industry. Would that be an accurate statement?
That's accurate. And to respond to the congressman from Washington, this industry is purely supply and demand. He is absolutely correct that supply is on the increase, or demand is on the increase from places like India and China, who have recovered much faster from the recession than we had anticipated. And that increase in demand requires a barrel-for-barrel increase in production if you're going to keep prices flat. And what we've seen is a decline in production. So if demand goes up, just economics 101, demand goes up, supply goes down, make no mistake that prices will go up, and that's what we're experiencing now.
And historically, when you look through this time of year during the winters, typically when gas prices are going down, the summers when they go up, and this is an historically high level of gas prices, not because of what's going on. In fact, the gas prices were rising well before the events in the Middle East and North Africa. It was because of the president's policies. And I want Dr. Mason and maybe Mr. Pugliese, is that correct, to comment on this, because you talked about not only the lost revenues but also the supply and demand issue, and in a policy, a federal policy shutting off production will actually lead to higher prices today. If y'all can finish with that. And then,
if I may, I just wanted to mention I did talk about the lost tax revenues from the Gulf closure. Those I've estimated to be on the state and local level of about $155 million so far and counting. On the federal level, about $350 million. It's just very simple math. If people don't have incomes, they're not going to pay income taxes, and they're not going to spend income that they don't have to generate sales taxes. I'd also like to follow up on the analogy of the cancer. If the doctors wanted me to follow a course of treatment for my cancer that could cause another cancer, I would think twice about following that course of treatment, especially if the doctors were paid by the drug companies that were sponsoring that course of treatment. So there's a pure conflict of interest there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. McKinley. See, I'm out of time.
This time I recognize the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Gardner, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today and spending time with us to share your expertise. Just a question for you, if I could start with, is it Mr. Pugliese? Very good. If I could start with you and just answer this question perhaps down the line. Do you believe the administration is doing enough to help lower gas prices by this summer?
No, absolutely not. I mean, of course, it's hard to know what expectations, how they may shift things. But if we had, as we say, if we had a very aggressive development program, if we had approved Keystone, if we had not denied the permit for Shell to drill on in the Beaufort Sea, we are creating a set of conditions out there in which it appears that we are unwilling to produce our own resources.
Dr. Mason?
Well, I think there are two things that can reduce gas prices. The one that people typically point to is increasing supply. So certainly if we had enough supply online, demand would adjust to supply and we'd see lower prices. The other thing, though, is reducing demand. And it strikes me that nobody's really talked much about what I think was a very good idea that the Republicans advanced a little while back about revisiting some old regulations and doing away with them. And one key regulation we still have on the books prohibits the production of high-mileage diesel automobiles in the U.S. because of old, stinky 1970s diesel, which is not even available in the U.S. anymore. We can have 65-mile-per-gallon cars right now with the stroke of a pen.
I want to get down through the rest of it, but could you send me information on the regulation you're referring to?
Yeah.
Thank you. Dr. Cooper.
The ability of the president or any other policymaker in Washington to affect the price of gasoline by the summer is quite limited. It's the long-term decisions that we make. I look on the demand side and see if we had actually adopted a 15-year program to double our gasoline mileage 15 years ago, we would have twice as much spare capacity in the world, and we'd be a lot better off. So in the short term, I think the short-term fixes are a mistake because they only make the long-term problem more difficult.
So additional, do you think the Obama administration has a plan to deal with the increasing gas prices?
I think any administration that said they had a plan to deal with gasoline prices would be whistling in the wind, as every one of the past 7 presidents have been. They simply, President Bush was faced with constant ups and downs in gas prices, and he never had a plan. Jimmy Carter didn't have a plan. The simple fact of the matter is that the president's ability to affect the price of gas in a 30-day or 60-day or 90-day period is extremely limited. And it is a mistake to claim you can do things that you can't do. Now, it might be fun to blame them, depending on which side you're on, the simple fact of the matter is that, and you've heard it here today, taking responsibility or throwing blame at presidents, especially over the short term, is just a political game. It has nothing to do with sensible policy.
I believe the president's moratorium planned moratorium is raising gas prices and killing jobs.
Mr. Daniels?
Well, I'm just a small businessman, not an oil man, but I could tell you this: the only way the president or this government can control the price of gas is to socialize it, and heaven forbid that happen. That won't happen. So with that said, the only other way that he can control gas, I've noticed something else when it comes to supply and demand, as in most businesses, as we do business at our peril. It used to be on the other end, supply and demand. Now, as a business, we demand as much as they could pay, and we're now dealing with the what I call the squeal factor. Unfortunately, we've graduated a few folks coming out of Harvard, maybe, who feel that they want to we got to get everything done on time. I say, how is it? It is. We've got to have production above the expectations, and completion.
Mr. Daniels, I'm sorry, I got to go. I've got to make sure we get to everybody. Mr. No?
Just one quick thing. I said that it's the first time in 6 years, actually the first time in 45 years if we don't have a lease sale. But I would say, look, I don't want a soundbite. I don't want to testify before Congress. I want to go back to Houston and put my workers back to work, and I want to drill for oil and gas. I'm not out to blame anybody, but I will say that if you let me go drill for oil and gas, I'm going to produce more, and that'll impact gasoline prices.
Mr. Massey?
My focus today really should be on the Marine Well Containment Company. I can say that our members have permits in, and if they're allowed to drill and those wells are successful, that's new production, and new production is good.
Thank you, Mr. No. The President Obama last week said, "I'll go anywhere, anytime to be a booster for American businesses, American workers, and American products." In your opinion, does domestic energy development boost American businesses, American workers, and American products?
Absolutely, and not just oil workers. As we mentioned, it's the hard hat manufacturer in Pennsylvania. It's the steel-toed boot manufacturer in Red Wing, Minnesota. This is a nationwide economic tragedy that's occurring.
This time, we recognize the gentleman from West Virginia, Mr. McKinley, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Cooper, can you tell me a little bit? This is the first opportunity I've had to talk to someone about the CAFE standards. What happens to a manufacturer who does not meet those standards? Are they fined?
In the past, they have been fined, but it turns out they haven't frequently paid fines. They've been excused from fines. But that is part of the program, as the incentive to meet the standard is to pay the fine, and therefore it's better to meet the standard.
I was suspicious that they were fined, whether they paid them or not, or however they worked out with those things. But what I don't understand is, from the free market, if your statistics were correct, that people want cars to have 60 miles per gallon, why aren't they manufacturing them then? And why is it that the federal government is going to step in and say, we know better than the public? If the public really wanted cars at 60 miles, can't they buy them?
Well, in point of fact, the supply side of the automobile market is not perfect. And so you had American manufacturers who completely missed the shift in demand, and they kept manufacturing gas guzzlers because their rate of profit internally is higher on gas guzzlers than it is on efficient cars. And now, having gone through bankruptcy, GM has reproduced itself, recreated itself as an efficiency-oriented company. They've said they will meet the 60 mile per gallon. Toyota has said they will meet the 60 mile per gallon. So a standard, here's what a standard does. It takes the risk out of investing in those technologies, because they now know.
I'm going to be, if I could recover here some time on it, I like the idea of having cars they have 60 miles, but I think that should be my choice as a consumer and not the federal government. Honestly, I tell you, I can't find anything in here in the Constitution that allows us this right to tell the public or tell the manufacturers. Can you share with me what section of the Constitution, where would I find that in there that says we're going to set the standards for automobiles?
Well, as interpreted by the courts for, at least in the case of fuel economy standards, for 40 years.
Could you just get back to me on that if you
I'll be glad to give you the legal
I'd like
history
to know
of why it is that the government can protect the American people. So now, every time you consume a barrel of oil, you're sending a troop to the Middle East.
60 mile per gallon car, but you're going to put more people at risk because you know very well that individuals that are injured, that are in impact accidents in smaller vehicles to achieve your ideologically driven motivation is more highly likely to be injured in an accident. So
Absolutely not.
You know that.
Absolutely not. This standard does not require rate reduction, and if it did require weight reduction, it would be with high-strength materials. Science has produced much stronger materials that weigh less. So there is absolutely no reason to believe that is the case.
You're not denying that there are more injuries in smaller cars. Is that what you're trying to tell us, this panel, that you're safer in a small car to get? You're saying
today,
your priority is to getting gas mileage rather than the safety of your children.
With airbags, you're safer in a smaller car today than you were in a bigger car 30 years ago. With seat belts, which the industry never gave us, let's talk about seat belts. Now, there's a government program that infringed your freedom to sit in a car without a seatbelt and impose all kinds of costs. Are you against seatbelts? Absolutely not. There are millions of Americans alive today because the government decided that seatbelts and airbags were good for you.
You tell me where this section is.
You didn't know well enough. You didn't know enough to know that you needed a seatbelt or an airbag. So we helped you out.
Gentlemen, yield back to
airbags. Time. Think about it. Tell your constituents that they really should be in cars without those safety features. The industry never gave us those.
At least
the regulation.
At least we have some enthusiastic witnesses, which I think is important.
Mr. Chairman, and I think it's been our practice that the witness should be allowed to answer the question. So you cut him off in the middle of his answer.
Oh, Dr. Cooper, do you want to make another statement?
No, that's obviously there's a philosophical difference here. And I got millions of live people who are actually better off because we told them to wear seatbelts.
Well, we want to have lively hearings, and we appreciate your being here. Now, Mr. Daniels, it's my understanding that as much as you don't want to leave, you need to leave. So we'll excuse you. We do thank you for joining us, and we look forward to being in touch with you more on these issues. Thanks for attending the hearing.
Thank you.
This time I recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Olson, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for coming today and giving us your expertise. And I promise I'm not going to have some of the fireworks that my colleague from West Virginia had, because I'm not going to talk about or ask questions about CAFE standards. I want to get back to the Gulf. I'm going to ask you basically 3 questions. The first one is kind of when do you think this economic nightmare is going to end? We've had a moratorium that supposedly the court threw out that was lifted, replaced by a permatorium. And in my opinion, the industry, this was a great safety record, 20 years out there drilling the Deepwater. And, largest oil spill in American history, I grant that, and the industry responded as best they could. I mean, one thing that, the industry did all by themselves, and Mr. Massey, I think you are somewhere down at the bottom of this picture, but this was industry-driven solution to the problems we encountered in April with the well, the Macondo well. And again, one thing we can't get a handle on here is what's really happening out there in the Gulf. And so the question I have for probably you, Mr. Noe, Mr. Adams, and Mr. Massey is how many rigs, how many deepwater rigs have left the Gulf as of today?
Congressman, there's been, I believe, 12 rigs that have left the Gulf since April, and others that are negotiating contracts, long-term contracts outside the Gulf of Mexico. In May of 2010, there were 25 floating rigs and 39 shallow water jackup rigs actively working in the Gulf of Mexico. By January of this year, only 8 floating rigs and 27 shallow water rigs were actively employed in Gulf of Mexico activities. So rigs are in fact idle, and either idled in the Gulf of Mexico and have laid off their crew, or like Hercules, are keeping their crew on the payroll despite the fact that the rigs aren't working, and then you've seen other rigs leave the Gulf of Mexico entirely.
Sir, we've had 60 highly technically capable offshore vessels leave the Gulf of Mexico for foreign operations.
So basically taking American jobs overseas and increasing our dependence upon foreign oil.
In the case of the vessels, that's 1,100 U.S. jobs for those vessels. And those jobs, as they enter into foreign markets, will, by the requirement of most countries, be replaced with foreign nationals.
And Congressman, I'll add that when rigs leave, it has a cascading negative impact on America. First, obviously, the rig is no longer available to produce domestic sources of oil and natural gas. The jobs leave with the rigs. The tax revenue that's generated from the economic activity associated with those rigs leaves as well. And then we can't forget the fact that we spend nearly $1 billion each and every day on buying oil from foreign sources, from the Middle East, from North Africa, almost $1 billion a day. And so when those rigs leave, they'll go produce oil and gas in some far-flung land, and we're just going to buy it back and give it to some potentially hostile regime to put it on a tanker and to float it up into our ports.
Again, less American jobs, more dependence upon foreign oil. One last question. This is about more about the jobs. And Mr. Adams, I want to say that I've heard a testimony specifically to what you're talking about the small companies and what they're doing to carry on. And I think Mr. Scalise was with me there, and Dr. Mason was there. We went down to New Orleans in August, I believe it was, Steve. And we had a woman who she was the president of a boat company that was going back and forth to the rigs, about 30 employees. We asked her, how are you getting by? And she said, well, I've had to cut the pay of 2 of my people, herself and her husband. They were taking nothing to carry the rest of their people as long as they could until this moratorium got lifted. And Dr. Mason, this question is for you. The administration, I've seen estimates they did about the job loss at somewhere in the 22, somewhere under 30,000 jobs across the country. And I know you've done some research that indicates that that's just a drop in the bucket. It's much more than that you take all the indirect costs, just not throughout the Gulf Coast, but throughout our entire nation. And I wonder if you could elaborate more on the job costs. I mean, just not this happen now, the direct jobs, but what's going to happen in the future and how it's going to impact our economy negatively.
Well, thank you. First, I'd like to point out that the administration's estimates were, for no explainable reason and no empirically justifiable reason, cut in half to reach their final numbers. They've never explained that. They've never defended it. But knowing what I know about the methodology, I know there's no reason for it either. The losses continue to mount. They just continue to build. And as others have pointed out, these losses are to the nation. The drilling pipe comes from steel mills in Ohio, Indiana, around the Chicago area where I grew up. All those materials come from throughout the nation. We are an integrated economy. It is an economic fact that if you raise costs for businesses, there will be less production. But it appears that with respect to your first question, Mr. Olson, when will this end? I hate to say it, but I think it goes far beyond energy and oil and gas. I think that it is a far-reaching problem throughout regulatory agencies. We have the example of the EPA regulating carbon, which is still challenged as whether it's within their authority. The EPA previously regulated phthalates in a similar way with a permatorium. This is nothing new. They did both without any economic impact studies whatsoever. The EPA hasn't conducted an economic impact study in decades. We're going after the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is now trying to regulate foreclosures backdoor through a settlement. And so, BOEMRE is just following in the footsteps of other agencies and I guess doing what modern agencies do. And unless we're ready to constrain regulatory agencies in their activities to affect economic growth kind of willy-nilly, well, we're going to have the same yanking around.
Thank you, Dr. Mason. Mr. Chairman, if I can yield back no time, I'll yield it back. Thank you.
You did a good job at that. Thanks. This time I recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Bill Bray, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Mr. Cooper, do you think there's any short-term or long-term benefit for America opening up more public lands for oil exploration and exploitation?
Consumer Federation is a consumer group. We don't deal with environmental questions. I believe that supply can help. Unfortunately, it becomes a distraction, not a solution. So the potential contribution on the demand side.
Would you agree that research and development of second-generation green fuels would be beneficial for long-term approach to the energy?
Supply side it can help us lower. Well, it probably won't affect the world price of oil.
No, I'm not talking about supply and independence.
It will create domestic sources of supply.
Okay. And then let me give you two scenarios. We today are exporting billions and billions of dollars to the third world by buying oil overseas, while we have oil potentials within our own boundaries. What if I propose to you that this Congress passes a law that any new areas open up for oil exploration will have those revenues or a portion of those revenues committed to a fund, much like what we've done with interstate freeways, and that is have a committed fund directly for a certain purpose. And what I would propose to you is, what would be your reaction to a piece of legislation that said we will now open up public lands for exploration with the funds, profits from that being dedicated to next generation green fuels? So rather than our money going overseas to third world countries, it may go into the United States, but a large portion or a portion of it will be set aside to develop those next generation fuels.
We firmly believe in compromise, pragmatic legislation.
Well,
I would bargain for a firm commitment to a much higher fuel economy standard, because that will do us a lot more. But we will certainly look at, and my resolutions don't oppose that. We really want to make sure we use the royalties well.
Well, the fact is, sir, if we went to diesel, you know those numbers, and you saw what happened in the 70s. I was a member of the Air Resources Board, so I've watched this stuff. I was a member of the Air District, the ARB in California, so I've watched this thing go. The fact is, though, we could get better mileage, but the fact is diesel is a toxic emission mega times over what dioxin is. So a lot of these things have offsets that we've got to look at. But my question, again, is the fact that we have these options that we can develop it. You were talking about the CAFE standards. Are you aware that the CAFE standards are set with 100% fossil fuel as the fuel being used to set those standards?
Going forward, we are incorporating other fuels in there. So we clearly have a we have a flexible fuel offset in the current standards. We are looking at how to deal with electric vehicles in the future.
Okay. Let me point it. Right now, EPA tells me, as they always have, they're using fossil fuels 100%, even though that is illegal in the United States. No consumer in America has the right to buy fuel for his system that is 100% fossil fuels. That is not an option for consumers today, but the federal government continues to use that in their standards.
The standard clearly has an offset for flexible fuel vehicles, which actually assumes...
I'm not talking flexible fuel. I'm talking about the fact that you're mandated to put ethanol in your fuel today. Nobody can sell gasoline without ethanol. Ethanol has only 70% of the carbon chain, and you do agree that ethanol is a mileage-robbing additive into our fuel system.
Actually, the jury is out on what it does to mileage because of the way it affects knocking and efficient
What is
turning.
that, Mr. Coe? You're telling me, you're telling me as an expert in this that you feel that ethanol gives the same mileage as gasoline does?
No, I've seen evidence on both sides of that. But it is absolutely.
I would be before you go any further. I would be very interested, sir.
Okay, I'll submit that.
I'm telling you, in the 6 years at ARB, we knew that this was a problem in California in 1992 when the feds were looking at this. I've watched this issue go over. Now, I'll just say this: when you get to the mileage, that additive, we now have laws in this country that says If you have alcohol, if you use ethanol, you get the tax write-off, you get the mandate, you get subsidized. But if you come in with green fuel, algae fuel.
Regularly, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. I'm just asking, do you think it's fair that we're giving ethanol priority for mileage?
Well, hey, clearly, if you produce a flexible fuel vehicle, you get to assume that it always runs on the flexible fuel, which is a tremendous benefit under the standard.
Mr. Chairman, let me clarify. We're not talking flexible fuel. We're talking
Regular order, Mr. Chairman.
Ethanol is
Rush, I'm going to let
fuel.
these two continue to explanate. Hold it a minute. Now, what were you saying?
I would ask for a unanimous consent for one more minute, please.
All right. We have a unanimous consent request for one additional minute.
Sir, you got to understand, I'm not talking flexible.
Wait a minute, Mr. Brilbrook.
Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I don't want to object, but let's make it 1 minute. This has been back and forth for an enormous amount of time.
All right. Mr. Bilbray has 1 minute, and Dr. Cooper.
Mr. Cooper, I was trying to clarify. We're not talking flex fuel. We're talking every automobile that burns gasoline is required to have ethanol in its mix. We're trying now to go to second generation, but the laws, the tax laws, the mandates, and everything else do not give next generation fuels the same tax breaks that corn ethanol is getting today. You think we should continue to maintain the subsidy for first generation, which you and I know was always supposed to be abandoned and moved to 2, and do you think we should abandon that system we have now and allow second generation the same tax breaks and same opportunities to replace first generation?
The Consumer Federation has, in fact, supported and underscored the importance of the second generation. So I am perfectly happy with that approach. We believe that the second generation will produce a much more environmental.
Even though they don't get the tax cuts now.
Well, there's lots of things we would fix in the tax law. Make no mistake about it.
Okay, time's expired, and Dr. Cooper, you and Mr. Bilbray can meet outside and finish this discussion if you'd like to. And,
he believes it as strongly as I do.
I know. But, and I think you agreed to provide some additional information, and the committee will get back for those of you who committed to provide additional information. So this concludes this hearing, and the record will remain open for 10 days for additional materials and statements. And with that, we thank you very much for your time, for the information that you provided, and look forward to seeing all of you again soon. Hearing's adjourned.